Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom from the holy city of Jerusalem. Today, the third day of the month of Adar of the year 5778. Mishenichnas Adar ma bin besimcho. From the time that Adar enters, we maximize joy. This is the 12th month of the year, already with our eyes forward to the coming new year of Kings, the first of Nisan, with the festival of Pesach coming soon afterwards, just less than now 6 weeks down the line. And we have ahead of us this week very special day on Wednesday night and Thursday. That is the 7th of Adar. That is the day marking the birth and the departure from this world of Moshe Rabbeinu. And we have then just a week after that, on Wednesday night of the following week and Thursday throughout the world, we have the festival of Purim. And on the following night, Thursday night and Friday, we have in Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh, and all of the other ancient walled cities, we have Purim, Shushan Purim. And so we have very great days ahead of us, and this Shabbat starting the whole period with Shabbat Zachor, remembering the crimes of Amalek against Israel and the denial of God Almighty. And indeed, we are seeing the arousal of this harsh klippah, this husk in our time, and it's very fitting to think about what is going on in the world and how we should be responding. For now, let us turn to our Navi, to Hosea, and we are continuing today in chapter 9 of Hosea. And today we have ahead of us quite a harsh and a grim chapter in some ways, culminating in very harsh decrees against the 10 tribes and against the whole of Israel. And we must pay attention to the rebuke of the prophet and try to understand how it applies in our time. So let us now turn to our text of Hosea chapter 9. Shalom, today, the third day of the month of Adar of the year 5778, corresponding to the 18th of February of the year 2018. And we come today in Hosea, our prophet, to a new parasha beginning in the beginning, at the verse 1 of chapter 9. And this indeed is a very harsh rebuke to the people and a very stern warning about the terrible times that are to come, leading the prophet to the most extraordinary prayer to cut short the agony by not letting the children even grow up. And beginning now, the prophet starts, Al tismach Yisrael el gil bo'amim. Verse 1 of Hosea chapter 9. Al tismach Yisrael el gil kohamim, ki zo niso me'al Elohecho, ohaveto esnon, Ale kol goreno hoistogon. Israel is not to rejoice with the gil, the exaltation, rejoicing like other nations. Israel have gone astray from your God. Their going astray has been their attempt to assimilate with the nations and to share in the cheerful celebrations of the nations. And the prophet rebukes Israel. That is not the destiny of Israel, to participate in the celebrations of the nations. That is not Israel's destiny. And the root sin of Israel has been that you loved the etnan, you loved the gift of the harlot, the fee of the harlot. The fee of the harlot was to subject herself to all of the dictates of her imagined lovers, attending the places where the corn was being threshed and prepared for grain for consumption. She'd get her share. In other words, the allusion is to the desire for a secure livelihood, which led Israel to fall from the mission of being a nation of priests and straying into the ways of the nations, as we shall see elaborated. The other nations, explains Rashi on this verse, the other nations, the ancient nations who did not receive the Torah and did not come into my share, says God, you, on the other hand, you have gone astray from me, and you have lost very great goodnesses. Rashi's explanation of the term, the allusions in the threshing floors and the granaries of the corn. And going back to the words of the prophet, verse 2, גורן ויקב לא יראהם, וסירוש יחחש בו. The goren, the granary, and the yekev, the wine press, the wine vat where the juices are flowing into from the pressed grapes, these shall not pasture the people. The sirosh, the new wine, the juices of the grapes shall betray her, shall lie to her. The imagined prosperity will turn out to have been of no avail. And the terrible result of this going astray, the opposite of the promise to the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he would give the children the land. Verse 3, Lo yeshvu be'eretz Adonai, v'shohov Ephraim Mitzrayim, uve'ashur tomei yochelu. No, they will not receive the promise of the covenant to dwell in the land of God. These sins will not allow the people to dwell in the land, and Ephraim will go back to the very source of the national subjugation in Egypt. They'll go running off to Assyria. These were the two great world powers at the time of Hosea and Isaiah, Mitzrayim, Egypt of the south, and Ashur, the aspiring world empire to the north, with their struggles and wars against each other. And these are like the two superpowers that Ephraim would be going into exile among them. And perhaps we could say that Mitzrayim in the south is allusion to what became the dispersal of the Jews to towards the east, the Orient, and under largely Islamic supremacy. And Ashur, which is situated in what is today modern Turkey and northern Iraq, this would be where the original spread of Christianity was taking place, and is alluding to the exile of those who went to the west under Edom. So they will no longer be serving Hashem there in the lands where they're eating this impure food. They will be separated from the true service of Hashem, for which Israel was destined. Verse 4, Lo yischu l'Adonai yayin velo ye'erevu lo zivechayhem kelechem onim lohem כל אוכלוב יתמוהו, כי לחמום לנפשם לא יבוא בייס אדוני. Let them not pour out libations to the Lord of wine, and their sacrifices shall not be sweet to him, be a sweet savor to him. On the contrary, it is attributed to him like the bread of mourners. We see in Leviticus that the concept of aninus, when a priest has had an immediate relative die, is that that priest is normally disqualified from eating from the temple sacrifices while he is in that state of deep mourning, because the temple is all about joy, and being an onen, being a mourner with in the immediate shock of a relative as yet unburied. This is a terrible state of mourning, which is the very opposite of the temple. And here Israel in their exile, Ephraim in their exile, will be attached to the side of death, the side of mourning of the Kalippah. Kol oichlov yitamo, all those who eat of those offerings that they will offer in their perhaps imagined prosperity in the lands of their exile, where they're eating fine meats and poultry. Even so, it will all be considered in terms of divine service simply impure, for their bread is for their souls, for themselves, through their egotistic desire for satisfaction and pleasure. That is what their nutrition, their intake is for. It doesn't come to the house of the Lord for service. They've got their priorities wrong. They have made the material enjoyment the priority. It would be better that they should not bring their sacrifices to God as if to fulfill an empty duty to slaughter animals. Better they should eat it for themselves, because it's going to be less of a waste, since their animals provide no pleasure to the Almighty. And now the prophet is coming to the very severe part of this reproof, standing as he was on the time of the first exile of tribes of Judah, Gad, and half of Manasseh from the very north of Israel, and it was coming to envelop the whole kingdom of Samaria, and would eventually come to Jerusalem in the form later generations of Nebuchadnezzar. And now he's addressing all Israel in verse 5. Ma ta'asu layom ha'moed u'layom ha'chag Adonai. What shall you do for the day that is appointed, namely the day that God has appointed for the day of retribution, the day of the Chag, the festival of God? This is a very ironic expression here, because the Chag is going to be the slaughter that will come against them. That will be God's vengeance, that they will be the sacrifices to atone for this sin. Verse 6. Continuing the reproof and what will happen as a result, with some very interesting allusions here in our Hebrew text. Ki hinei holechu mishoid Mitzrayim tekabetzeim Moif tekaberem Mahmad lechasbom Kimosh Yiroshem Hoyach bi oholehem. Ki hinei holchu mishod. They have gone on from this shod, this robbery, this oppression that they have. They've gone over and beyond. on account of the many robbers and bandits that will come upon them, says Rashi, namely the successive waves of hordes of foreign soldiers who will overrun the land of Israel to take them into captivity. They will have gone into exile on account of this. Egypt will gather them in. That is to say that once again the original house of slavery of Israel will gather them back again, and there they will die in exile. Mof to Kabarem. The Mof would appear to be a place name, and the Metzudat Zion, the explanation of the words accompanying the commentary of Metzudat David, says that it would be reasonable to suppose that Mof is Naf, which is the name of a place in Egypt, where simply the nun of the name Naf has got exchanged with the mem here in our text. So Hosea, the father of the later prophets, prophesying before Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and all of the other 12 shorter prophets, here he's telling the terrible fate that is going to be awaiting. As we shall see in the ensuing verses, they'll be buried in exile. Now here, the next phrase, Mahamad lechaspam, well, some Islamicists are interested in finding allusions to the name of the Ishmaelite prophet in the biblical text, of which there are a number of places where the same letters are in our text as in the name of that person. And the root word Mahamad is chemed, desire, chemda, desire. Lachmod is the verb to wish to have something, to desire something. And this Mahmad Kaspam, according to the literal meaning, would be that these are referring, according to Metzudat David, to the storehouses where their wealth is carefully guarded, and this Mahmad, this place of desire, which is where they've put their money, what will happen to it? Kimosh Yeroshem, the nettles and the weeds will inherit them. Hoach bo'olehem. The hoach is another kind of prickly thorn that shall be in their tents of residence, portraying the utter devastation which will come to them. And now, reminding Israel again that this is what is coming ahead, and we've not yet heard the worst of it. Verse 7, Bo yemei ha'pekudo, Bo yemei ha'shilum, Yedahu Yisrael, Evil hanovi, Meshugo, Ish horuach al rov avonecho verabo masteimo. Well, now, says the prophet, have come the days of punishment, there come the days of payment. Yid'u Yisrael, Israel shall know. We've heard several times in the earlier chapters of the prophet that Israel were without knowledge, without understanding. But says the prophet, the time will come when they will know, when they will understand through the disaster that will befall them. They will see that all the warnings of the prophets and the proofs were true. This is particularly a theme in the prophet Ezekiel, where under retribution, all of the peoples that are subject to the retribution, be it Israel, be it the nations, they come to know God. And the purpose of the retribution is that they should come to know God. But of this time, it is said that Evil Hanovi. Our translation here gives the word distraught is the prophet. The word evil has a very negative connotation, one who is out of their mind in folly and wickedness. Meshugo ish or ruach, mad is the person of spirit. And these are the reactions, says Rashi, even of the true prophets watching the disaster overtaking the people, the horror and the consternation. Rashi cites the case of the prophet Hananiah ben Azur, who challenged Jeremiah, who at the beginning was a true prophet, but he fell from his ways as he was watching the disaster overtaking Jerusalem in the time of the destruction of the Temple of Solomon. The prophet will turn to evil even in the face of what has actually happened. The person of spirit will go crazy, and all on account of the abundant sin and the mastema is the stored up hatred, the resentment and hatred that God is harboring, which will all be visited upon them. Verse 8. Tzofe Ephraim em Eloi Novi Pach Yokoish Al Kol Derachov Mastemo Beveis Elohov. Says Rashi on our verse, they set up their own prophets. Who were drawing the people to the side of their idolatry. We can actually see this in the narratives of the Book of Kings, the second Book of Kings, particularly the many false prophets that there were, particularly in the northern kingdom. We see the prophets that were established by that were already in the time of Yeravam ben Nevat, Jeroboam. We see in the instant of the true prophet Ido Anavi that went to the altar of Yeravam and paralyzed Yeravam's arm by the word of his mouth. But then the true prophet Ido got waylaid by a false prophet. And the phenomenon of the false prophets goes all the way through to the very end of the second book of Kings, and even into the exile where we see from Ezekiel, who was prophesying in Babylon, and also in Ezra and Nehemiah, that there were false spiritual leaders and false prophets all the time. And so here, the prophet Hosea is telling us about this phenomenon in our verse 9 in Rashi's interpretation. He continues, Rashi, Novi Pach Yokush al Kol Drochov, the prophet, there is a pit that is spread out in all of his ways. That is to say, the people set traps for the true prophets. They would set pitfalls in order to entrap them. Mastemo beveis Elohov, this stored up hatred and fury in the house of his God, that is the true God. Says Rashi, this was in the Bet HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, where the people of Judea in the time of King Yoash, the later years of Yoash, they killed the prophet Zechariah. And then we see from Jeremiah, who was much later at the time of the destruction of Solomon's temple, they wanted to kill Jeremiah, as we find in Jeremiah chapter 26, where the false prophet cries out, Mishpat Moves le'ish hazeh, there is a judgment of death that must be inflicted against this man. Continuing then with our text of Hosea, verse 9 traces it all back to ancient historical events. And let us again recall that Hosea was addressing generations that did not yet have the Tanakh that we have redacted before them. And there were national legends which were handed down from generation to generation of what had happened, and now the prophet is giving the narrative of from the vantage point of true prophecy of what lies behind this this situation that had developed by his time, of this desire to assimilate and to follow the ways of the pagans. And in verse 9 he starts tracing it back, and this will be followed up in the coming verses. Verse 9, Hemiku shichesu kirmei hagive'ohom yizkor avoinohom yifkod chatosom. Hemiku shichesu, a doubled expression. Hemiku, they've gone very deep with the shachas, the corruption that they have instituted. Two verbs joined one to the other. They've gone deep into being corrupt. Kirmei hagiva'or, like the days of Giv'ah. Well, here is something which, according to our commentators, is simultaneously referring to two separate historical events that were decisive in the history of Israel. The one is recounted at the end of the book of Judges, and that is the story of the Pilegesh Begiv'ah, the story of the man whose Pilegesh, his concubine, left him going from Har Ephraim back to Judea, and the man went after to his concubine's father's house, where he's detained by his father-in-law for many, many days, until he finally is going to take her back to where he lives in Mount Ephraim. And as recounted there in our text, he doesn't want to go to spend the night on his journey with his donkey and his attendant in Jerusalem, which was then in the hands of the Jebusites. So he thought he'd go to an Israelite city, and he came to the city of Giv'ah, where an old man warns him not to sleep in the street because he'd be in mortal danger. This is a town that has dropped to the low level of Sodom. And just like in the narrative in Genesis, in the portion of Vayero, when the angels come to take Lot from Sodom, and they wanted to rape these two people that had come to the town, and Lot says, "We'll take my daughters instead." And here we see the terrible level of corruption and immorality to which the Sodomites stooped. Likewise in Giv'ah at the end of Judges, which is a story that by the commentators is said to have occurred earlier in their history, Giv'ah was a town in the territory of Benjamin. And when this man was taken in by the old man together with his concubine for the night, the people of Giv'ah surrounded the house and demanded that they send out the visitors to be subject to nothing less than a gang rape. And in fact, the concubine was sent out of the house, and she was subject to the most terrible abuse the whole night. And she, in the morning, she was just ready to drop dead, which she did. She couldn't get up, and the horrific story of how the man cuts up her body into pieces and send pieces to all the other tribes to assemble and make war on Benjamin. And it's a very involved story there in the closing chapters of the book of Judges. The very interesting thing is that after this war, the very first king of Israel is from the tribe of Benjamin. That is Shaul, King Saul. And the other reference in Giv'ah is to the coronation of Shaul, who came because Shaul's place was called Giv'at Shaul. Giv'ah in Hebrew means a hill. And Shaul was from the tribe of Benjamin. A very, very ironic story indeed, part of the deeply hidden irony of our Tanakh. But here, what the sin and the flaw in the time of Saul was altogether that the people wanted a king other than God Almighty and His Torah as taught to them by the true sages. But what was the purpose for Israel to have a political king to fight their wars? And although the Torah itself in Deuteronomy institutes the kingship, there was something wrong in the people's, as it were, desiring to, instead of submit themselves in trust to God's protection, to try to get a political protection for themselves. And this is what we see is coming undone in our chapters here, that the promise of the government to provide security to the people is going to break down. The original purpose of Israel was to be the people of God who would be subject to God's protection, and in stooping to the levels of the Benjaminites of Giv'ah who performed those terrible atrocities, and the people more generally expecting the political government to solve their issues for them, these were the source of the sin and the reason for the reproof. So now turning back to our text in verse 10, we see the development of this idea of the depth of the corruption by contrasting the generations that came with the early generations of the patriarchs, verse 10. And this verse 10 is the beginning of a new parasha stuma, a closed portion. That is to say that it is a continuation of the previous section, but a kind of separate paragraph lasting until the end of this chapter, from verses 10 until the end of the chapter, verse 16. So there's a very beautiful expression here in verse 10, Ka'anovim bamidbor, motzosi Yisrael, kevikuro viseino, bereishiso, rohisi avoisechem, heimo bohu v'halapeyor, vayinozeru laboishes, Vayehiyu shikutzim ke'ohovom. We go here in one verse from the glorious beginnings of the people to the root sin that occurred even before they came into the land of Israel, while they were still in the wilderness. Ka'anovi mamidbu motzosi Yisrael, like grapes in a wilderness did I find Israel, says God, in the wilderness where all is parched, where there were the wilderness of the nations, where there was none to serve God and to teach Hashem to the world. The patriarchs were like grapes, so lush. Kevikuro v'seino bereishiso, like the first fig on the fig tree in its very beginning. Ro'isi avoisechem, I saw your ancestors, the patriarch. Hemor, the second half of the verse starts with a Tameh Mikra, the cantillation note that makes a severe disjunction between the previous word. There was the previous glory of the grapes in the wilderness and the first fig. But Hamor, these people now in Ephraim, Bo Baal Peor. This now is actually not only Ephraim, but all of the tribes, Bo Baal Peor. They came to the temple of Baal Peor. The Hebrew root of Peor is to expose something. And according to our sages, the service of this idol, Peor, was by people turning their behinds to the statue of the idol and exposing, separating their buttocks to expose their anus. And this was a symbolic offering of defecation to the idol. In other words, connecting to the side of excrement, the side of filth, the side of waste, the side of creation that is secondary to the true purpose of creation, which is only the service of Hashem. Now, this incident of Baal Peor is recounted in the book of Numbers at the end of Parashat Balak, right after the blessings of the wicked Bilam, forced prophetically by God to bless Israel. Right afterwards, Bilam, who really wanted to undermine Israel, set the Midianite women to entice the Israelites through sexual seduction into worshipping their god Peor. Vayinozru laboishes. And they separated themselves off from where they should have been to the shame. The shame is an expression for idolatry, which makes ashamed those who serve idols, for the idols are empty. And the people became like a Nazir, like a Nazirite, only in the opposite direction. Vayihu shikutzim, they were abominations. Ke'ohovam, just as much as they love those that they loved, namely the daughters of Moab. It was the daughters of Moab, and spurred on by the Midianites, the daughters of Moab, who came out there at Baal Peor to entice the Israelites to through seduction to their idolatry, and indeed that was what happened. There was a flaw that ate into the people. There's a very difficult to explain or to understand point about Israel. Here we see none are like Israel for publicizing the reproofs and castigations against us of our prophets. The Tanakh spares no one, and the Tanakh is ruthlessly honest about even Moses and King David and Samuel the prophet and all of the other tzaddikim, King Solomon, and down to the very end. And here we see the prophet also castigating Israel. And there is this fatal flaw that developed there in the wilderness at the end of 40 years of wandering, just as they were poised to enter the land of Canaan. This fatal flaw of this attraction to idolatry that we see here mentioned. It seems to run through the whole of the Tanakh. They were supposed to fight the idolatry, as we see in the book of Joshua. By the time of the Judges, they're already getting involved in it and steeped in it. And this is the fatal flaw that all came from after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, when they were supposed to have been purified. This poison was injected into them at that time. And now we are going to see the prophet really come to his worst curses of reproof. Verse 11, Ephraim ka'of yith'ofef kevoidam mileido umibeten umiheroyoin. As for Ephraim, like a bird flies off, so shall their glory fly off. From birth and from the womb and from the conception. Well, here perhaps we have in our text an allusion to abortion, where a prospective being, this prospective Israelite, never sees the light of day because the embryo is already aborted in the womb, and from the time of conception, or the conception is not even permitted. Says Rashi on our verse, Ephraim ka'oif yisoifef. Omar Hanovi, says the prophet, Halavai ve'yihiu ka'oif hazeh hanoided mikinoi v'chodal mipirya v'rivyo. Halavai, would that, if only they would be like this bird that goes wandering away from its nest and therefore ceases being fruitful and multiplying and rearing new generations. Kach yishaklu es zar'am, so may they lose their seed. This is the loss of an aborted embryo, where the child is lost, or either before being born or after being born. Oy b'shas leido, either at the time of birth that the baby would be stillborn, or yisakil babeten, or it should be literally digested up in the belly of the woman. V'yapiloi, they will abort their embryos. Overshas heron lo yikloitu, or the time of the pregnancy, the time of the conception, the seed will not be absorbed. That is to say, the male sperm will not be absorbed into the female egg to create a viable being. Says the prophet, Kima betza begodlam es b'neihem. What is the benefit of their raising their children? Shehem yigdelu v'shokaltim me'adam, that they should grow up, only that I should then cause them to die and be removed from humanity. So we see here the very grim prophecy about the physical extinction, God forbid, through lack of procreation. And we shall see presently what it was that they were doing to merit such terrible reproof. Verse 12. Ki im yegadelu es b'neihem v'shikalatim me'odam ki gam oy lohem besuri mehem. For even if they do, as we just heard Rashi quoting this continuation, if they do raise children, God will come and He will cause them to perish, to be no longer enumerated among the children of men, the live people, all on account of Ki gam oy lohem, woe to them indeed, besuri mehem, when I turn away from them. As if to say, this is now the time of reproof, but so far they ain't seen nothing. So now the prophet compares Ephraim to the most prosperous city of antiquity, the city of Tyre, in Hebrew called Tzor. And modern-day Tyre is in the location of Tzor approximately. But Tzor we find very prominently pictured and depicted, particularly in the book of Ezekiel, with its tremendous prosperity and international connections. And now comparing Ephraim to Tyre, which eventually met her doom, as is prophesied in Ezekiel and in Isaiah. Ephraim, kasher ro'isi letzor, shesulo v'nove, v'Ephraim lo hoitzi el hoirei bonov. Ephraim, as I saw, like Tsur, like Tyre, planted Venova in a lush place. Ephraim had this tremendous national advantage. And so too, says God, just like I saw Tyre in that state of tranquility and serenity, she was the crown of all of the states and cities. So have I seen Ephraim planted in its pleasant place. And what did Ephraim do for me? Says Rashi, interpreting this verse, what did he pay to God? He was engaged in taking out his children to kill them, that is to say, to sacrifice them to the idols of the Molech. That follows the Targum of Yonatan. That is to say that the generation of Israelites that Hosea was addressing were so hell-bent on their idolatry, they were prepared to devote their very children to these idolatrous services, including to the actual slaughter of the children was practiced in the worship of the idol Molech. And here now the prophet comes to this most terrible imprecation against the people, and yet it's steeped with mercy. Verse 14, Tein lohem Adonai ma titehin, Tein lohem rechem mashkil, Veshodayim tzoimekim. The prophet here praying, if you're going to kill them, do it when they're as tiny as possible so they won't grow up to experience even greater misery. Give it to them, give what you will give, as if we just heard that the prophet in verse 13 speaks about the children of Ephraim. But our Talmud, as we studied quite early in this series, says that here Hosea, when he heard these words of God in his prophecy speaking about Ephraim's children, Hosea should have protested and said, these are your children, master of the world. They are your children. And instead of doing that, Hosea, as it were, is complicit in this replacement theology that is going to dispense, God forbid, with Israel through simple failure to procreate. Give them what you will give them, says the prophet. Rahim mashkil, a very womb that will lose its fruit, that miscarries. Shodaim tsumkim, the breast that will be shriveled up. And again, going back to the historical roots of this flaw, verse 15. Kol ra'osam bagilgol ki sham senesim. Al roya me'al alehem mi beisi agodeshem loy oisef avosom kol sorehem soirerim. All their wickedness was at Gilgal. There was it that I hated them over the wickedness of their deeds. I shall banish them from my house. I shall not anymore love them. All of their leaders are all gone astray. Well, Gilgal was the place where the sanctuary first rested after the children of Israel came into the land of Israel under Joshua. But it was subsequently moved from there, and it came to Shiloh, where it was in the time of Samuel, and remained until the time of the of Eli, the high priest, Eli the prophet, when the Pelishtim, they sacked the sanctuary at Shiloh, subsequently went to Nov, and then Saul slaughtered the priests of Nov, and then the sanctuary came to Giv'on before it came eventually to Jerusalem. So now when the sanctuary moved away from Gilgal, explains Rashi on our verse, in the time of the northern kingdom, the false prophets, at a time when the political dictatorship and military dictatorship would not permit the tribes to go up to Jerusalem lest they go back to subjugation to the house of David. So besides the idols that were set up in Bet-El and Dan, the false prophets, according to Rashi, also made Gilgal a shrine on account of the sanctuary once having been there, as if that created some spiritual presence for all time. But that was the site became used for their idolatries under direction of these false prophets, and that's why God hated them. In other words, we've traced the sources of these flaws that came to the time of Hosea and are left with us until today, back to the wilderness, to the flaw of Baal Peor with the daughters of the Moabites, back to Giv'ah, to the coronation of Saul, and back to the wicked Benjaminites of Giv'ah, who stooped to sodomite behavior, and the idolaters of Gilgal. For that reason, says God, I'm driving them out of my house, that is to say, the home of holiness, that is the land of Israel. I will not love them anymore. All of their officers have gone astray. So here we see this, again, this tendency to banishing and replacing Israel with something else. To the point, verse 16, Huko Ephraim, Shoreshom Yovesh, Peri Val Ya'asun, Gam Ki Yeledun, Vehemati Mahamadei Vitanam. Ephraim has been stricken. The prophet is looking forward to this coming blow that will hit the people. Their very roots are dried up. They cannot produce further fruits nor children. Even if they will, they'll become suicide bombers. These Mahamad Vietnam, they'll become from the very womb that God will kill them. Here again we see another apparent a similarity to the name of the prophet of the Ishmaelites, and we can see a number of allusions in these words. Yimosei Elohai ki lo yishamu loi v'yehiu noidadim bagoyim. Well, here in the conclusion of this very grim parasha, my God, says the prophet, will despise them. And the reason is that they never listened to him. They did not listen to him, and for that reason they will go wandering among the nations. Well, here the close is a little less pessimistic than the earlier portion, because at least they will be in exile, indicating that they will still be alive and that the destruction will not be complete. And we shall press on in subsequent sessions in the study of Hosea and come to his final conclusion of redemption. And here we leave our studies of the Tanakh for today. We'll have a brief interval, after which we'll come back to looking again at the laws of the prohibition of blood and consequent need to salt or roast meat to remove the blood, both in the halachic and the Hasidic perspective. Shalom, and back to our studies today, continuing in the halachot relating to the prohibition of the consuming of blood, which is why we need to salt or roast our meat before cooking it. And before we get into the study of the halachot, and after the halachot look at some Hasidic ideas, I would like to invite your feedback on this choice of subject matter, which is indeed intricate and complex. It is, as I've tried to explain in our opening session, precisely the stuff of Kollel study, where candidates for rabbinic ordination would, after learning the basics of and knowing the basics of daily prayer and blessings and washing of hands and Shabbat and festivals, would begin the journey into the complexities of the halachah through the study of the laws of the salting of meat, and then the laws of separation of meat and milk, and then the laws of forbidden mixtures, all of which have many overlapping concepts, as we shall see today. But this is very intricate subject matter, and time is precious, and we all have limited amounts of time. For that reason, I would like, please, to ask for your feedback on whether these are areas you would like to continue studying, or whether we should maybe be turning perhaps to a different format and different areas of study. I'm certainly very, very sold on the idea of continuing with our study of the Nevi'im, the prophets. To me, the study of the Tanakh and the prophets is part of the neshama, the very soul that we need to vitalize in our time. And the halakha can be quite dry and sometimes touches on subjects that are remote from us. When we were studying the Mishnayot, we studied a number of tractates that do relate to practical life, but we could very shortly get off into tractates of Mishnah that are dealing with temple law or property law or marital law, other areas that each one is fascinating, but there may be other things people prefer to be studying, perhaps more Rabbi Nachman from the source, Likutei Moharan, and perhaps more general discussion about how all of these Torah teachings should be relating to us as we encounter the challenges of our times. I'm under considerable pressure of time, particularly at the moment when I'm leading services in the synagogue, morning, afternoon, and evening, and also conducting special studies for the elevation of the soul of my late mother, Aleha Shalom. And so I've been unable to continue with our former practice of having a weekly Shavuot Tov hookup on Sundays, and I'm in an internal debate about quite how to address issues that I was addressing in the Shavuot Tov hookups within the context of 3 weekly sessions on a Sunday, Monday, and Thursday, which I definitely hope to continue. So please do let me have your feedback, and then without further ado, let us now look at some of these halachot of the prohibition of blood in meat. Shalom today, the 3rd day of the month of Adar of the year 5778, corresponding to the 18th of February of the year 2018. And we continue in our studies of the Sefer, the book by the late Rabbi Aharon Pfeiffer, Zecher Livrocha, the Rosh Kollel of the Johannesburg Yeshiva and Kollel, who passed away some years ago, in his work Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the concise code of law, specifically on the laws of prohibition of blood, salting and roasting of meat. Now in chapter 3 of the work, the first part of chapter 3, and here we deal with the case of meat that had been slaughtered where the process of salting or roasting had not been conducted to kasher the meat. The meat is still raw, and what will happen if the meat was soaking in water for a period of longer than 24 hours? after the slaughter, before the process of the removal of the salt. Soaking the meat in water does not, as we shall see, draw out the blood in a satisfactory way. The only way to draw out the blood is by either applying a layer of salt over the surface of the meat that will open up the pores of the meat and allow the blood in the meat to ooze out, or by roasting the meat over a fire, where the fire will also open up the pores of the meat and the blood will come dripping down into the fire and will not be consumed. But here in our chapter today, we're going to discuss what will happen if meat had not been koshered in either of these two ways and was left soaking in water. And we start with a general principle which we shall find applied in the laws of prohibition of meat and milk together and other laws of forbidden mixtures. What happens if a food is resting in a liquid for a period of 24 hours or more? This food that is in the liquid, be it water or some other liquid, this is now called kavush. Kavush in Hebrew is a word that would have the connotation of preserving or pickling, and the process of kavisha, or preservation or pickling, even simply by soaking something in water, and that would be a very reasonable thing people might think to do, particularly in a place where there was no refrigeration, where to keep the meat cool, people might be inclined to put the meat into some kind of vessel and pour water over it so that the evaporating water will keep the meat somewhat cooler and less likely to go off. But the point here is that the process of leaving any food, not only meat, but any food in a liquid for over 24 hours, this process of kavisha is considered to have an effect that is like that of cooking. And while the food is in the liquid, it's going to exude taste into the liquid. The taste absorbed contained in the piece of meat or the piece of any other food, be it cheese or whatever, inside the liquid is going to exude into the liquid. And likewise, the food that is soaking in the water or other liquid will absorb taste from the surrounding liquid. And we have a principle throughout our discussions of kashrut, kavush kimavushal, something that is kavush, that is to say preserved or pickled even in just water, that has the same status if this goes on for 24 hours as mavushal, as something that has been cooked, with consequences that we shall see presently. Now, all of this applies if the food remained in the same liquids for an entire period of 24 hours. But if they change the liquids within the 24-hour period, you change the water, that does not cause the food to become kavush. It is not considered as if it had been cooked in the water. Even if the water was cold, it will be, if it's considered kavush, that is to say, it's considered as if it has been cooked. But if this was not in the same liquid for a whole period of 24 hours, it is not yet considered kavush. There are those who say that even if they didn't actually change the water, but they simply took out the food from the water during the 24-hour period, even if they afterwards put the piece of food back into the same liquid, that would still be considered to, even though altogether it was there for 24 hours, because of the interruption, because the food was taken out of the liquid, that is not yet considered kavush. So the bottom line is that in order to become in the status of kavush, which is comparable to having been cooked, the food must stay in the water or other liquid for no less than 24 hours continuously. Now, for that reason, with relation to our subject of meat and the blood in it. If meat had not been salted to get out the blood, nor had it been roasted in fire, if this meat was soaked in water for 24 hours, that meat is now considered in the category of kavush. And if the amount of water in which the meat was soaking was not 60 times the quantity of the meat, everything is now forbidden for consumption for the following reason. Because through this process of soaking the meat in the water, the meat exuded blood into the water. And now the water, which is not 60 times the quantity of the meat, to nullify the blood, the water goes back with the blood into the meat, and therefore the meat contains blood that's been reabsorbed on account of absorbing from the blood that's separated. Now this blood, this meat that has absorbed blood through the process of kavisha, of being soaked for 24 hours, there's nothing you can do to rectify the situation, because it can no longer be kashered through either salting or through roasting. The reason is that the blood that went back and was absorbed through the kavisha soaking gets tangled up, and it gets attached and stuck in the meat on account of the power of the process of this semi-cooking of kavisha, and it will no longer be possible to cause this blood to get out of the meat either through salting or through roasting. Now, as a qualification to the above rule, suppose the entire piece of meat was not in the water. Half of it was down, submerged under the water, and half was above. So the piece of meat is only entirely forbidden on account of this law of kavush, of soaking being akin to cooking, if the entire piece of meat was under the water. But if part of the piece of meat was submerged under the water and part of it was above the water, then only the part that is inside the water is going to be forbidden, and of the part that was outside the water above that which was submerged, you'd have to peel off a peeling of meat, what is called kedei kalipo, the peeling off of a sliver of meat that is said to have absorbed the what was submerged under the water, and what is above that sliver that you cut off, which was all the time above the water, that is permitted for consumption. The reason is that any blood that was exuded from the meat that was under the water and then got reabsorbed is not considered to have the power to penetrate up into that meat piece, that part of the piece of the meat that was above the surface of the water. Now, if the water in which this piece of meat was being steeped had a quantity of 60 times more than the meat itself, which might be quite unusual, there'd have to be a lot of liquid there to be 60 times the piece of meat. This might be the case if somebody had a piece of meat they were intending to put into a pot of soup, and they put in the piece of meat inadvertently that had not been salted, and then put in a lot of water for the coming soup. If there was 60 times the quantity of water than meat, then we are not concerned about blood that may have separated out of the meat, because the moment any blood did leave the meat and go into the water, it's immediately nullified by the 60 times quantity of water over and above the size of the meat. It's botel b'shishim, nullified in 60 times of something permitted. And it's as if it's so negligible, it's gone out of the world, and So even though the meat may have reabsorbed from the water around it, since any blood that was oozing out got nullified in the water, any water that was reabsorbed by the meat during the steeping process is not considered to have any blood in it. However, we cannot yet simply take this piece of meat that had not previously been salted or roasted and was in liquid 60 times itself. We cannot take the piece of meat and just go and eat it. It still needs a kashering process. Because even though some blood may have been exuded from the meat during the 24 hours it was under the water, presumably not all of the blood was exuded, and therefore if they do cook it now in order to, without kashering this meat initially, at the time of the cooking, all of the blood that is left will start moving around and be exuded and will cause everything to become forbidden. Now, when it comes to kashering this piece of meat that was submerged under 60 times itself after not yet being salted or roasted, there are those who say that it's possible to kasher it the way that all meat is kashered, either by salting or through roasting. Others who dispute this and consider that the blood that was not exuded during the steeping process will only be has become stiffened in the meat, and the only way to get it exuded by the meat will not be through salting, but specifically through the process of roasting over the fire, because the power of roasting to get out the blood is greater than the power of salting. And even though blood that was cooked is only forbidden midrabanan as an enactment of our sages, as we studied earlier, blood which was in meat and the meat was steeped in water or liquid for 24 hours or more, that blood, although we said it's as if it had been cooked, and we just said that blood that was cooked is only asur midrabanan, nevertheless the blood that was in meat that was steeped is held to be forbidden through the letter of Torah law. That is encompassed in the concept of blood that is forbidden by the Torah. When the blood is cooked, it's no longer really absolutely blood. But here, before it's cooked, even though it's been steeped, it's still blood. It's therefore forbidden midoraiso. And even though we do have this rule that, generally speaking, kavush kimavushal, that when something is pickled or steeped in liquid, it's as if it were cooked, that only applies to the oozing out and the absorption of the blood, as in our case. But the blood itself, where if it had been cooked, it would be held to be not forbidden midoraiso. That's because something changed intrinsically in the blood during the cooking process. Where it was only steeped, we do not hold that the steeping process actually fundamentally changes the blood, and therefore the blood remains forbidden. Well, now just a few words of Hasidic insight in order to enhance our subject and put it in a wider Hasidic perspective. Let us now look at some words from Likutei Halachot in the closing moments of today's discussions. We have been discussing the difference between chalev, fat, and blood. And from the Hasidic perspective, says Rabbi Nasson in his Ma'amar in Likutei Halachos Yerodei, laws of chalev and dam, fat and blood, these two categories are the categories of performing an unwitting sin, where you don't know what you're doing, you don't know that it's wrong, or you don't know that it carries a particular punishment, as opposed to mazid, which is when somebody flagrantly and willfully rebels against the authority of the Torah and performs a prohibition. And these two concepts, which we find in Leviticus in the different sacrifices, covering a shogeg act, or when a person is punished for a mazid, flagrant violation, these two are bound up with the two figures of Lavan, Laban, father-in-law of Jacob, and Esau. And this is the concept here of the tree of knowledge of two opposing sides, good and evil. On the other hand, besides the tree of knowledge that has some good as well as evil, there is a lower level of impurity, and that is the level of the 70 nations, which is considered to be completely evil. The sole root of the 70 pagan nations is a root that is contained in the klippah, the outer husk. For Laban, the Aramean, he was exemplification of where the evil that is in the vernacular translation holds sway. The vernacular is the language in which we deal with the secular world, as opposed to the holy tongue in which we relate to God in all things sacred. And Lavan, we see, spoke Aramaic, which is the language of the Targum translation of the Torah. And the Aramaic and the vernacular generally in all translations of the Torah may actually come to be misleading if we don't understand the true import of the words of the Torah. So one may go astray from studying only in translations. And here is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as represented by the figure of Laban. And Laban has this ambiguous position. That's why he's called Laban, the Aramean. He called the place of his covenant with Jacob Yegar Sahaduso, the pile of stones of testimony, Gilad, which is what Jacob called it, the Gal, the pile of stones, Ed, testimony. Lavan called it in Aramaic, and this is written in the Torah, in Genesis, in the portion of end of Vayetze, Yagar Sahaduso, the same meaning. And therefore, even though Laban is a very, very severe and difficult klippah husk, because the klippah of the tree of knowledge is very, very difficult, even so, there is still a lot of good in it. And therefore, Lavan contained great good in him. And this is the concept of somebody who performs a sin unwittingly. This concept of being mistaken is rooted in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in the aspect of the Targum, the vernacular, where things get confused, as our Rebbe has taught us in the his teaching on which this discourse is based, commenting on the prophecy of Habakkuk al Shigionos, where Rashi says, Ketargumo. Esau, on the other hand, he is the dross of the gold, the impurity of the gold. This Esau is the encompassing evil that has no good whatever. And Esau is the concept of the flagrant rebel against God. Because when a person rebels flagrantly, this he does on account of the boiling of his blood in impulsive, flagrant rebellion, in anger, with murder, and this is embodied in the figure of Esau. And that's why this aspect is called mezid, which is a connotation of cooking on account of the boiling of the blood, as we have in the expression when Jacob was cooking the pottage that he sold to Esau for the birthright. The expression in Hebrew, vayozed Yaakov, he was cooking up this nazid, pottage. Well, there the root is the same as in mezid, flagrant boiling of the blood, rebellion. And Esau, when he sees this red pottage, he says, feed me from this red pottage. But the shogeg, the unwitting sin which a person performs through lethargy, through laziness, through the fat, as opposed to the blood, that is the aspect of Lavan. that these fats weigh down the body and stop up the spiritual sensitivity and awareness of the person till the person falls into an aspect of sleep. They can be awake on their feet, but spiritually asleep. And this is a slumber, a forgetfulness. And therefore, the person comes to forget and performs the prohibition b'shogeg, unwittingly. And thus we find throughout the tractate of Kerisos, dealing with the various sins that carry the penalty of karet, of spiritual excision, and other places in the Shas, the Talmud, the way of the Tana, the Mishneh teacher, is always when he wants to speak about a shogeg, a person that has done something unwittingly, he always cites the example of eating of chelev. That is to say, chelev could be very easily confused with kosher fat. The forbidden chelev fat, the coarse tallow fat, or the fats that suet fat with its coarseness could potentially, particularly in a warm climate, be confused with kosher fat. And this is the item cited where if a person had in front of them a piece of kosher fat and a piece of non-kosher chelev, and they ate one of them, and somebody says, well, maybe you ate chelev, that would be a case of shogeg, the person unwittingly sinned. And throughout the tractate of Kerisos, where it's speaking about an example of a sin that is not punishable by karet because it's only a doubt, that is a case of shogeg. And the reason is that chelev is the aspect of lavan. Cheleg is lavan, white, and this is the aspect of shogeg. And that's why we find in our holy text that repentance for an unwitting transgression is harder than for an intentional transgression, because if the person didn't realize or know or fully appreciate how forbidden it was, they would be less inclined to repent than if they knew it was forbidden, but they did do it flagrantly. In truth, the mazid, the flagrant sinner, even though this is more serious than a shogeg, unwitting sinner, but there are different aspects to this, because in a different way, the klipa of Lavan is even harder than that of Esau, much more than the klipa, the husk of Esau, because Lavan comes with subtlety, with guile, and with treachery, and with convoluted arguments, until he conceals from the person and confuses their mind, so that the person is less able to be on guard from this mental confusion, from this spiritual root. And that is the aspect of shgagot, of unwitting transgressions, that the evil inclination causes the person to stumble without their awareness. And that's why it's very hard to get out of this without great help from above. But Esau, who is the flagrant transgressor, who comes with murder, with the boiling of the blood, at least when one knows that this is the case, one can gird one's loins and strengthen oneself to fight with him, to kill him, and to humiliate him. Amen, Kain Yiratzon, so may it be his will. With that, we come to the conclusion of this first discourse of Reb Nosson on the subject of forbidden blood and fats. So with that, my dear friends, we conclude our studies for today, a little running over our normal allotted time slot, and God willing, we shall be back tomorrow at 1600 hours Israel time. And meanwhile, let me wish you from the holy city of Yerushalayim, Shavua Tov Vorach, a good and blessed week, and let us strengthen our joy in this month of Adar, this month when we are already feeling the beginnings of the coming redemption. Shalom, Shavua Tov Vorach, a good and blessed week.